Hello again, folks. My name is Victor, and here is my advanced writing public-facing work, where I'll be going over the ethics of generative AI in the realm of crossword puzzles and other word games. I spent a bit of time developing a crossword generator in the previous video, and while it was quite horrid at making good puzzles, it still introduces a very interesting and important question. Interesting because word games don't typically come to mind when people talk about the arts, and important because language-based tasks frequently get top billing in AI discussions at large, like crosswords in a few years might be sitting ducks, vulnerable to being trivialized by models such as ChatGPT. So how do word games play into this discussion in a novel way? This is Word Hunt. You'll hear me saying the phrase word games instead of crossword puzzles a lot. While the crossword is undoubtedly the most relevant and well-documented instance of note here, I believe this discussion can be generalized a little bit further. Games such as the Jumble and the New York Times Strands share key traits with crosswords. They're all games, they're all based around language, and they all directly reward information retrieval and lateral thinking skills within an artificial environment. We'll be using the phrase word games to refer to these kinds of constructions. So, before we actually begin the ethics discussion, an analysis of someone else's analysis of a certain regularly published word game provides us some important foundational context. NPR, as part of their weekly Weekend Edition series, which features a gauntlet of assorted interviews and series reporting, publishes with it its Sunday Puzzle, where an on-air contestant is presented with what are essentially themed riddles. The whole point is that each week is a different challenge. The Sunday Puzzle from a week ago started with this prompt. If you were to list the 10 digits from 0 to 9 alphabetically, the first two on the list would be 8 and 5 respectively. In this puzzle, I'm going to name something that's second alphabetically in its category. You tell me what comes first. So, for example, Monday was given as the first cue, with the intended response being Friday for days of the week. Here are a few more instances that showed up on the second if you want to pause the video and think about them. In the meantime, let's get into the findings of Zhao and Anderson. In 2023, the two researchers explored the proficiency of several large language models, or LLMs, in solving NPR's word games. The example they include in the article involves country names with the same consonants as a given word. What they found was that GPT 3.5, the top LLM tested, was able to record a 50.2% success rate in both answering prompts and explaining its answer. Whether you consider that good or bad might depend on your background in automated word game solvers and how much you've interfaced with ChatGPT. We consider this result quite good, in fact. Like, the very notion that a program could explain the answers is pretty impressive. What was notably not a good showing from GPT 3.5 was its generation of new Sunday puzzles. It did awfully at making new puzzles of its own. Throughout the iterations of testing, GPT was tested on consistency and conformity. If you fed GPT its own questions, will the new answer and correct answer match, yes or no? If the puzzle is consistent, does the explanation actually make sense with the generated question and answer, yes, no? 77% of the generated games made it past the consistency check, and 27% of the games made it past both checks. But there's actually a third metric, arguably the key metric here, that none of the games succeeded at. Trivialness, which sounds abstract for a metric, which is why it's so important. These two examples pass the entrance exam, but fall flat on their face during every actual test. Every answer is a well-known movie title, with one or more letters from the title replaced with a number. The first rule of Fight Club should be, do not use Fight Club like this in the Sunday Puzzle. So now it might be a little more clear why word games belong in the arts discussion, and why games such as Spelling Bee and Wordle didn't make the cut when I defined word games for you. It's that last item in the checklist that is the X factor here, and out of everything in the list, it's usually an afterthought when people try to define, for instance, a crossword puzzle. A study from 2014 found that, while raw knowledge and the ability to retrieve said knowledge from your mental archives are indeed of utmost importance when solving a crossword puzzle, human experts employed abstract routing tactics that tangibly helped them solve grids faster. For the novices, this didn't really matter because they didn't have options to choose from, they were only able to solve a few clues in a given empty grid, but the experts were employing maneuvers completely foreign to automated crossword solvers. Also of note is that the way automated solvers went about filling grids has been informed by mathematics, algorithms, and more standard models in the field of computation, i.e., not at all what human experts were doing to solve grids. The study aimed to make an automated crossword solver that worked like a human, and it actually turned out pretty well, but creating crosswords like a human turns out to be a whole different beast. The New York Times is considered by most to be the crossword top dog. Their daily crosswords go through a very rigorous application and editing process. The NYT editorial staff have carved out many of the bounds that regular crosswords operate within to this day. So a given grid now is to abide by quality checks, of which there isn't a solidified list, but there are many. Crosswordese, or words that only really show up in crosswords due to their common letters, is generally frowned upon. Two tricky answers shouldn't really cross each other. Two brands or other proper nouns shouldn't cross each other if both aren't quote-unquote really well known. Foreign words are allowed only if they're common knowledge, like ocho or niet. A bunch of S's clustered together against a wall is bad, as it's seen as a crutch for plural nouns intersecting it. You should probably include rare letters like Q and Z somewhere, and don't overuse these letters, and blah 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 blah. Like, some of these conditions seem easy to program, but the quality of a grid in general is purely based off vibes, much to the dismay of GPT. And that's not even getting into writing the clues for a given grid, for which the golden rule is to avoid giving too many synonyms and definitions and instead make them exciting. As seen before, LLMs aren't the best at making exciting puzzles. Which brings us to the first con that speaks against the use of generative AI to make word games, and that's quality is lost without human edge. Every NPR Sunday puzzle is a refreshing new trivia game that expertly straddles the gap between comprehension and difficulty. The beginning clues are assuredly easier, either due to their everyday use or popularity, and the later clues are assuredly harder, but still fair if you explain the answer to the player. Every New York Times Tuesday crossword has a smart theme based on wordplay, turns of phrase, a secret connection, similar sets of letters, etc., all while abiding by the gamut of soft rules explained earlier. The current literature strongly suggests that right now, even during the AI revolution, it is the human that bestows quality on a word game. Leading right into the other big con, just like photographers, just like digital artists, just like writers, replacing a creative field's output with generative AI's output will put people out of jobs, or at the very least make credit and compensation very difficult. And this isn't rocket science, we can take a look at more generalized surveys to make this point. Earlier this year, 459 artists were polled on questions surrounding the use of artificial intelligence to programmatically generate art. The questions primarily pertained to the interactions between artists and AI's impact on the field. A 5-point Likert scale was used to ask the participants the questions, and most of the question results shook out as you'd expect. When asked if generative AI is a threat to art workers, 62% of respondents agreed. Not an overwhelming majority, but threat is a pretty strong word choice, so more participants than not have correspondingly strong opinions about this. When asked if AI art models were a positive development in the field of art, only 45% of artists agreed with the sentiment. When asked about the disclosing of what artwork was used to train an AI model, 80% agreed that the programmers behind AI models should publicly disclose in detail the source material used to train their models. The last question is actually a 3-part question, and it gets quite messy here. The final questions revolved around who should get credit for an AI-generated piece of art. Here are the results for if the folks who programmed the AI should receive ownership of a generated art piece. Here are the results for if the person who used the AI as a customer should receive ownership of the art, and here are the results for if the artist whose work was used to train the AI should receive ownership. Notice how divisive this last set of results is. At the very least, the takeaway can be that giving credit is messy and some party's gonna be burned in the inevitable legal disputes, but more concretely, a majority of artists see AI as like a legitimate threat to their jobs. Like, take it from the artists themselves. So how the hell can we flip this around to make a case for generative AI? Well, we can start by simply just taking a look at the advantages. A study from North Sumatra, Indonesia in 2023 sought to find a correlation between playing crossword puzzles as learning media and critical thinking skills. The natural sciences students of MIA's Farhan Sharif Hidayah were split into an experimental group that had course-relevant crosswords included in their learning regimen, and a control group that depended on the pre-existing science curriculum. The researchers found that the average in the experimental class was 12 points higher than the control class average. And while there are external factors such as the raw learning time and the quantity of learning material that may have impacted the study, the results aren't moot because of them. Like, packaging course content into a game that presents a slightly unusual but constantly engaging task may flip a switch for some. It's also like a game, which is good for teaching. But for those unmoved by the game is good for brain argument, there is a stronger education adjacent point that can be made in favor of auto-generating crossword puzzles. Majima and Ishihara describe a workflow for creating crosswords that doesn't necessarily involve AI, but it can totally be applied here. The use case for the generator in the paper is based on the unique situation that the Japanese language is in regarding loanwords. In short, there are 3 writing systems that are each essential parts of the Japanese language. Hiragana and katakana represent the base phonological units of the language, like ka or to, kind of like the letters they have to work with. Both of the scripts represent the same pool of sounds, so what's the difference? In short, katakana functions in a similar way that italics do in English. Titles of movies and shows are sometimes in katakana, manga onomatopoeias are usually rendered in katakana, and most prevalently, they're used for words from other languages. There are so many words of English origin used in Japan, there isn't a defined list really, words just keep flowing in. It's obnoxiously fluid for how different the 2 languages are. So because of this state of affairs, translating from English phonetics to Japanese phonetics is an acquired skill that is best honed by exposure to translating scenarios. To provide this, Majima and Ishihara extract a list of keywords based on a bunch of Japanese news data, use the data to find a 7x7 grid, and generate clues as fill-in-the-blank questions from which the words originated. For instance, one clue talks of iRobot, a US company that produces the blank robot vacuum cleaner. The answer there is Roomba, and you have to transliterate the Japanese wording of Roomba into katakana in order to fill the grid. Couple things of note here. First is that this is a great tool for its intended use case. Seeing these once foreign words in their sentence contexts provides semantic foundations for the player, and the idea that the crosswords can be churned out en masse is actually desirable here. The more practice, the better. Second, and this is key here, we've essentially removed the special lateral thinking that gave crosswords that unique touch, and we did so without diminishing the efficacy of what we're trying to do. This is an entirely different scenario than the daily NYT crossword puzzle. This isn't trying to be art, it's trying to be useful, and it carves out its niche properly without encroaching on the creative fields of word games. So, a couple of takeaways. To begin, the definition of art in the context of art threatened by generative AI is broader than you might expect. Anything with an author is art in this case, and it deserves a corresponding seat at the discussion. Addressing word games directly now, GPT and LLMs at large have a long way to go before they become an issue for the constructor community. Not that it incentivizes putting off the conversation, just good to mention here. Now, I am of the opinion that crosswords should be split into two contexts: an educational context, where novelty and creativity are of no importance, and a standard context that holds creativity as its keystone. In regards to the latter context, for the sake of crossword constructors and for the quality of the puzzles, don't let AI near these. But the real point I'd like to make here ties back into the original question: how do word games play into this AI discussion in a novel way? No matter how staunchly you feel on an issue, don't assume it's cut and dry like I did. I thought keeping AI away from anything with a creative field was in our best interest before doing this video. While valid counterpoints that I didn't mention regarding my pros and cons surely exist, I hope I'm still doing well by potentially introducing them to those who weren't aware before. Like, what if AI and humans can collaborate and make the best of both worlds? How will the standards of the word game constructing community change or not change if AI is used? Like, there are still many more things that I have yet to consider. Thank you very much for watching. I'm quite happy that the word games of the New York Times have gained popularity over the past year, and that I could talk about them with you. Peace.
Millions of views, not bad for a copy. Yeah, the IT threats can't stop me. Show me that face, girl, take off the boxy.